Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost, and this is Friday. It's the 19th of July. I'm not good with dates. It's the 19th of July, and I think this is something like our 215th or 216th consecutive weeks of doing community gatherings, which are basically opportunities to bring the community, the theater community in New York and around the globe now, together to meet each other and talk about theater, to talk about different aspects of theater. Um, so originally this started as a response to shutdown. It was a way of my keeping my business open and not having to close the doors since we couldn't do anything live. And here we now are on Zoom. I was introduced to Zoom. Hello, Zoom. And been doing this ever since April 17th, 2020. So the conversations have really, I basically, people ask me, where do I find my guests? Well, I know a lot of them, and a lot of them are friends, but I'm also one of these people who I don't ignore emails that come in. I get like 150 a day, so I try to ignore some of them. But I get emails, and I'm one of these people who like reads an email and goes, this is an interesting person. I'm going to ask them if they want to be on my show. And so I just ask people to be on the show, and there are enough generous people in the theater community who have lots of things that they want to say, and uh, that I've managed to keep this going for 215 or 16 consecutive weeks. Today, I've got some old friends on. I mean, I got people that have been like regular guests on this show. Um, for those of you who don't know us, I forgot to mention this is Theater Resources Unlimited. This is an organization that I created 32 years ago. And it's basically, we're all about helping people understand and navigate the business of theater. So it's a lot of producers, but it's also a lot of writers and actors and directors. And if you're out there and you're part of the arts world, whether it's theater or even film, come be a part of us. We'd love to have you. So here we are talking about different stuff. And today I reached out to Martin Platt and Chris Grady, who are both people that have been on a few times over the past 4 years that we've been doing this. 4 years, is that right? 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 4.5 years. Eek, eek, that's frightening. So anyway, we're gonna, actually Chris was the one who had emailed me and said that he's very much involved in trying to find partnerships between the countries, between the UK and America, but also between UK and elsewhere and around the world. He's very much into creating a community, a global community. And he wanted to know if he could come on and talk about that today. And I said, absolutely. He will be joining us a little late. He's not here yet, but I do have Martin Platt with me. Martin Platt is an old friend. He's actually been one of the teachers of our producer development and mentorship program, which is a program that we've been running for, oh God, 15 years. I don't know. It's been a while. And he's spoken many times as for me, and he's a friend, and he knows a lot of stuff. He's a producer and also has a general management background or with his company, which is Prairie Street Theatricals. And here he is. Hi, Martin. How are you?
And I'm also a director. And the good thing is I have no opinions about anything.
Oh my God, he's one of the most opinionated people you'll ever find on social media. So good luck, and look for him. People actually enjoy following him on Facebook and elsewhere. Yeah, Martin, you have no opinions about anything. So what are we going to talk about today?
No
Um,
idea.
no idea. So Chris basically started this. Chris started it, and he wanted to talk about partnerships, and he wanted to talk about international partnerships and global partnerships. I know that you specifically have worked in London and you've worked in the UK, here and around the country. You actually have a new niche that you've been working in over the past couple of years, which is touring shows, right? You have a touring company now?
Well, I'm partners from time to time with a touring company that mostly tours UK work in the US.
Ah, so there, we immediately come to the heart, the heart of this conversation there. So you're pretty much aware of the U.S. market, and you're pretty much aware of the U.K. market. And we've talked about this before as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about the the advantages and disadvantages of each, and why there might be something positive in reaching across the Atlantic Ocean and partnering with somebody from across the pond?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm working on two shows now as a GM that are American shows that have decided to go to the West End first. And there was an interesting article by Sonia Friedman, the English producer, who's one of the most successful producers in London and Broadway, about the fact that when she started, which is about when I started, shows on Broadway or off-Broadway cost 3 times as much in New York as in London. All that's changed is now they cost 5 times as much in New York than they do in London, for any number of reasons. I mean, we're doing it, working on a 3-character play, 3-character, 1-set play. The Broadway budget would be $6.5 million now, sadly. And in London, the budget is about 1.1 million. And there's nothing different except what city the show is in. And that's just the reality of, because of union contracts, because
Yeah, I
of
was
the
going to
way
say there
you
are reasons. The reasons basically are the pay structure that we have that's kind of stems from equity and finds its way through the entire
It's
system.
pay structure and it's work rules and it's ways of doing things, cost of advertising, everything is drastically less. So that's kind of, and a lot of producers are looking, they're not. A lot of you may have noticed that PBS or someone has been showing things like Anything Goes with Sutton Foster and American in Paris, the Broadway production. These things are popping up on TV, and they're popping up on TV because replica productions were done in London, and that's where they were filmed, which costs almost nothing, as opposed to costing, 2 or 3 million to record that and show it from Broadway. So,
well, let me ask you something. We're gonna focus a lot on UK. I think that's also Chris's focus. But have you partnered with any other areas of the world? Do you have any experience with Australia other than knowing Neil Gooding?
no, not with Australia. I mean, I did a big touring show that we produced with Cami when they were still doing that. Aldous Grafani and the late Gary McAvee. And we produced a show in South Africa that we took to Edinburgh and then took to the West End, and then brought to the US and then toured all over the world for 5 years.
Is that an oak tree?
No, this was a show called Gumboots, a South African music dance show. And then we just toured in America, this little musical we did off Broadway, Scottish musical Islander, that we brought over. We toured it. It just closed. It opened in October at Seattle Rep. And we toured that for most of the year until we closed in April, I think, in Maryland.
Well, Chris's point of view, and he'll probably come in and be a little clearer about this than I am. He wants to network producers from all over the world. Let me just start with a dumb question. What do you think the positive aspects of trying to network producers from all over the world might be? Is there a reason to do it, or is it just a social thing?
I think there's a good reason, because you find projects that you might be interested in that need another person at the table, another, for both money and creatively, projects that want to play in both countries. And the other thing is, if you want to do a show in London, which we're doing 2 of now, and I've done 5, you need a producer in London as part of your lead producer team. You can't just go there and do it, because it's a really foreign place. It's very clubby, and you need someone who, as Meredith Willson would say, you got to know the territory. And that's kind of what It is the same as if you were in England and you wanted to bring your show off Broadway. You're going to find an American producer to work with you because, again, it's just, or you can hire a general manager to also be executive producer. But you need a producer on the ground in the country that you're doing the show in. Otherwise, you'll probably end up paying a lot more for things than you should. Plus, I mean, they know things you don't know and ways of doing things that you don't know. They know the best personnel, the best production managers, the best shop for your show, depending upon your budget to build it. And they will know the theaters and audiences that will respond to your show, just like you would know for New York. You'd have a better idea of shows that might actually work here than somebody in England who's done a show that they love. And you go, yeah, but that's, you know, like a great example, because a friend of mine directed it and co-produced it in England, The Shark is Broken, which came out of Edinburgh and went to the West End and did okay, and came to Broadway and was a financial disaster because it's just not a show we wanted to see.
There's an interesting thing that was said last week with my Australian guests, Nancy Hayes, Michael Tyback, Paul Hodge, and Neil. Somebody was asking about how they get there's what was it? Was there any way that their show, which has to do with Australia and Australia cultural things and this and that, how would they get their show done there? And Neil just started laughing. He said, we can't get our own shows done here. It's you know, you can't just say, okay, because my show's about Australia, let's do it in Australia. You actually have to know a little bit about the market.
And also
Here we have Chris. Chris is coming in slowly. There he is.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Chris.
Hello. Hi there. Hi, Bob. Hi, Martin. Hello, everybody.
We were just talking about you.
Oh dear, I'll go away again, shall I?
No. So we're in the middle. We're in the middle of an answer. Basically, Martin is basically saying that the reason why partnerships are valuable is because if you're an American wanting to produce in London or a British producer wanting to produce in America, you need to have a partner who knows the territory. And I was just saying last week we had a playwright asking Neil Gooding and my panel of Australians about what could they do to make their play, which is all about an Australian incident, or it was about the Australian experience, how to make that happen in Australia. And Neil just said, well, you know, basically, just because it's about Australia doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to find an audience here. He said we have no audience for plays here at all. So those are some of the hard realities that a lot of us don't want to face. But knowing somebody in Australia can prevent you from trying to go down into Australia and have your play produced and have no interest in it because nobody down there is going to plays.
Now, the one thing I wanted to say quickly about this, to finish that last thought, is the other thing you have to think about when you have a play you want to take to a different culture, and England is a different culture, Australia is different, Austria is different, is that the odds are that your play is going to mean something totally different in the country you go to. Years ago, I did 4 productions of David Felcher's play, Miss Evers Boys, about the Tuskegee syphilis study, where from 1930-something till 1972, a bunch of Black sharecroppers in Alabama were told they would be giving treatment for syphilis when they actually weren't, because the government wanted to run a study of untreated syphilis in Black men. And they wanted to do this to prove that Black men and white men were different. That's actually what they were doing. But they told these men they were being treated. There was a huge scandal. Finally, someone blew the whistle. It's a wonderful play. So I did a play 4 times in America. And in America, the play was about racism for the audiences. There was no question that's what the play was about. We get to England, to our first stop, which was the Barbican Centre in London. And the play was no longer about racism. The play was about medical ethics. Same play, nothing changed, but their experience was not our experience with racism in the South in America. Their experience was with other issues. So the same play, there was a racist element to it, but that was not the most important thing about the play. That was an eye-opener, I think, for all of us, including the playwright, when we got over there.
Let me give sort of like a start over here for a second. So, Chris, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody and tell us a little bit about what you're doing, and then we're going to come back to the conversations about partnerships.
Yes, certainly. So thanks very much indeed for having me as part of this meeting. Yes, so my name is Chris Grady, he, him, and I've just come out of Operation Mincemeat, which I was at this evening, which I hope many of you will have seen if you've been to the UK, and hopefully you'll get to see on Broadway at some point. My background is working in theatres and with running theatres and festivals. And then over the last 10 years, I've been running training programs for creative producers. First at Mount View Theatre School in London, running an MA, creating and running an MA in theatre producing. And then from April 2020, when the world changed, developing an online training program, which indeed some of your esteemed members have been on. And then what I'm also here to chat with you about is a new program that's been developed, which is a searchable database for producers by producers. And when you'd like me I can share, if you'll let me share the screen at some point, I'll share that and let some of you have a look at it. There are some of your members who are already on here, on the database, and I will look forward to sharing that with you. We're just beginning to launch it around the world.
Okay, so let's see, how shall we do this? Let's continue the conversation about partnerships. We also have a question already from the room. Rob Hoffman wants to know, at what point should a US-based lead producer consider moving into the development of a new musical which has a London-based theater story at its core to the UK for further development and production? Is it cheaper soup to nuts to do it all in the UK? And the thing that he's leaving out, of course, is what you just said before, Martin, which is the fact that just because the content of a play about a London experience might not be the same as he's expecting it to be when it's received in London. So, which I thought was a very interesting thing that you brought up before. And the example that you gave of your play was kind of startling.
I mean, I would say the history of these things too is the thing that we hate the most that comes from the West End to Broadway. And I really can't think of one that ever succeeded, except for the Lehman trilogy, because it was an Italian play, not an English play, are plays from England that purport to be about America. Because they don't really know about America the way you know what I mean? All the details are wrong. The idea is right. And the same thing when we write plays about England, we have the big idea, but unless the playwright's English and the director's English to begin with, all the details are going to be wrong. And audiences could take umbrage at that and not embrace the work. So that's tricky if you're trying to take a play about a culture from America, the Americans have written, into that culture. It's tricky.
In addition to that, there are aspects of UK culture, for example, that really aren't very interesting now to UK audiences. And I think of that in the main, the sort of Regency and Georgian classics and things like that are not that interesting to the UK audience, but they can be. British frock drama can work very well in other countries. In the US, I believe it can work quite well. So in terms of that question of when do you talk to a UK producer about developing or co-developing a project which has a London theme or a UK theme, I think right at the beginning is to really explore with a UK producer who is born and bred in the UK, how it would work and how it would read with a UK and the tourist audience that comes into the UK in its development. And I'm sure Martin will also talk about the cost.
I just want to say to Rob, that's actually a great entry. You can actually, I would say that a good strategy would be to reach out to a British producer for advice rather than partnering immediately, and just have them advise you on the play, and then if they become interested, that's a way of sort of maybe bringing them in as a partner. But to start off as just, I need your help, I need your advice. I'm an American with a play that has a British theme. What do I do? That would be,
And also
that's
understand that it's the same as if you're an American in America and you want to do a show on Broadway or someplace and you need a producer with a lot more track record than you to help make it happen. That producer you partner with is going to want to actually be a producer. They're actually going to want to have ideas about the development of the play, about who's going to direct it, about who the cast are going to be. Don't think you can just have a whole package and get somebody to say, oh yes, I love it, I'll help you raise money and put my name on it. Producers want to be producers. And I'll tell you the one thing, for when we did Lend Me a Tenor musical in London, in the West End, we had a huge workshop. We did the whole show, like you do for a Broadway show, with mocked up bits of singing and costumes. We spent about $300,000 on it. Everybody came, and we were talking to these producers after, and everybody loved it. And everybody said, when we said, do you want to come join us? They said, well, no. I mean, you've done it. It's a good show. What would we do? And they know what they would do is just raise money. And real producers don't want to just raise money for other people's shows, for the most part. They want to actually get their hands in it when there are still hands welcome to be put into it.
That's a great thing to remember. And really, Rob, I think the answer is explicitly very early now. Before you go any further, you probably want to get reach out to somebody who might be a British partner for you. So Chris is losing his internet. Oh, there he is. Are you with us yet?
I'm sorry, as I am back again. I'm actually standing now in a corridor in order to get the internet, but also not to keep people awake who are elsewhere in the house. So,
oh, that's right. For you, it's like 10:30.
Yeah, it's 10:30. It's just coming to 11 o'clock. Yeah.
11, yeah. Well, thank you for being with us so late. I appreciate that. So let's talk about what you hope to achieve with your database, Chris. What is your goal?
Certainly. Well, if I may share my screen, I can show it to you, I hope.
Well, I made you a co-host so you can share your screen.
Well, no, I'm on.
Oh, I have a question for you. I know that you've been producing in London for a long time. You did Lend Me a Tenor, the musical, 20 years ago? How long ago was it?
2011.
2011.
So
that's not 20. That's yeah, that's a
that
while.
I did Nixon, did Gumboots, went to the West
So
End.
my question to you is that we see changes in our business here that they always seem to be going in the wrong direction. They always seem to be things that are making it harder to produce. Has London been pretty consistent, or have there been developments and changes in how you do business there since you first started to how it is now?
I mean, I think my understanding from colleagues right now is it's getting more expensive to produce, certainly in the West End. It's getting harder and harder to get theaters, probably because of all the American shows coming in, but it's become kind of like New York. Getting a venue for a show on or off West End is a challenge.
Well, but getting a venue for a show in Broadway is just as big a problem. Basically, you have to get in a long line for availability to a theater, and ultimately the theater owners pick and choose the pieces that they think are going to be successful or that they're interested in. So you can't just get a theater here or in London.
Yeah, or that are produced by colleagues of theirs that they like, even if they know they're terrible.
Yeah, there's a lot of nepotism.
What is changing here in the last few years feels as though there are a lot of younger producers coming through, working a lot more collaboratively. And there's a lot more collaboration between regional houses and the West End. Now, Martin has done co-productions with Plymouth. But we've got, if you look at many of the shows that are now in the West End, they have been pre-produced within a regional house or one of the off West End houses. And that collaboration is happening more and more. And there's a lot more younger people trying to push their way into the business. Although, as you so rightly say, the theatres are owned by the old guard in the main.
I mean, I would say historically, my experience, I've been going to London since probably 1968 pretty regularly, is that there's always been, and there still seems to be, if you're like a young director, right, and you're at some fringe theater someplace, and you do a show which get tons of attention, it's not unlikely that suddenly you'll get offered a show by the National or the RSC or the Almeida or someplace really posh. There's not this, oh, who are you? We don't care, which we have in New York most of the time. I think for younger artists, writers, and directors, and now younger producers, the door has always been more open in theater in London than it has in New York. And that's just a different in culture and the way they look at artists and think of artists, I think.
I'm back with proper signals. My apologies for messing around.
And a dramatic black background.
In answer to your question, what we were finding with running networks of producers was that they couldn't really find each other very easily. And if, for example, you wanted to do a project with theatres in the north of England, who are the producers who are based up there who know each other and could collaborate with you? If you want to work on some work that's particularly around circus or something like that, how do you find other producers who are interested in that world? And so we decided to try and develop a database which is only for producers and for producers to be able to connect with each other. So it's a sort of mini closed LinkedIn, I suppose, is one way of putting it. But it will then develop to have a bit of a WhatsApp feel about it so that you can have collaborations and conversations as well. So that's what we've started to create. And if you'd like, I'll just give you a quick look at it.
Okay.
And it is in its...
Is Martin already signed on? On your yeah. Okay.
So it's in its development form, but if I just log in here, hopefully will let me log in. There we go.
It's a long password.
So what I can do is people are joining up onto the database, and the people on the database pop up, but they are searchable. So first of all, if I just spot somebody, I can view them, and I can see what this person does and what their kind of job roles have been and what their art forms are specifically that they're particularly interested in, and their experience. There is an opportunity to add a PDF, a CV or something that isn't there with Martin at the moment. And it takes you as quickly as possible to more information about this producer. And you choose whether it goes to your LinkedIn profile, to your own website, or email direct. But every single person on this database is contactable by other people on the database.
Chris, I have a question for you, or
Please.
A comment. You say it's a database it's for producers and producers exclusively. It's almost inevitable that, I hate to say it, but it's almost inevitable that writers are going to find their way there. I would suggest to you that you add as one of the things on the website to the profiles, whether they're open to receiving inquiries from writers, because it's going to happen.
There is a code, a tick box that you can put in if you want people to contact you. Absolutely.
Okay.
Anybody on here is approved. And so if somebody is a self-producing artist and they're also producing other people's work, and it shows they're producing other people's work, then they're very welcome to join. And they can be producing their own work as well. If they are a writer looking for a producer, then they won't get onto this database. I mean, they can hack their way in, or they can find somebody else or let them in, but it's intended that the only people who are searching on this database are people on the database. But then what you're beginning to get then is be able to search by location. So I can search internationally by the USA, somewhere. Try again, that's Uganda.
I think we're past Uganda. I think we're UN.
Here we go. And hopefully,
There we go.
if I search by that, a few people will pop up.
I only know 3 of the 4.
And I can search again by, I could search again by where, let's take a region. I can search by Edinburgh, and I can search by people who work in small scale and touring theatre. And that will actually just, at the moment, just pop up with one person. So and the next step is also to be able to search by art form. If I just go into my own profile, then I can edit this at any point. But what I'm also adding, which is not on your on the profile, not shown on the profile, is some demographics as well, in terms of what is the ethnicity of the person who's signing up, what's their gender, what's their age, and what's their level of experience. And in time, we'll be able to do searches also on that. And the next step is to add to this the ability for any producer to put a message up there saying what they're looking for, or what they've got to offer, or what they need. And those will be searchable as well. So that's the first step of this. What we're finding is that people are finding it very easy to log on and join. They're beginning to make connections already, which is great to hear, even with the 45 people that are on at the moment just in the test run. They're beginning to make connections. And as we reach out, I hope, to other countries of the world, that's when it may get even more interesting. Because if you are particularly interested in doing a project in Korea, say, then who is out there who's working in Korean theatre? And I've got 14 of those producers coming into London next week, and hopefully most of those will go onto this database very soon. So beginning to make connections internationally. That's the idea behind it.
Okay, well, thank you. Do you want to unshare and we'll go back to conversation?
I will unshare.
I just want to note to the room, please, I encourage you to put questions in to Martin, things that you're specifically interested in. We can always ask Martin and Chris about that. Don't hesitate. I like these things to be interactive. So
Chris, I think if I'm right, it was like 24 years ago this summer that I met you in Edinburgh. I think it was summer 2000.
Yep, was indeed. Yeah. And we're now still doing it, still making stuff happen.
I met Chris because I started dating his then girlfriend, now his wife's best friend.
You were dating his girlfriend?
No, his girlfriend's best friend.
Oh, his girlfriend's. Oh, okay. Sorry, I was going to say, how did that work?
No.
Yep, that's how we met, and I was running the Pleasance theatres in Edinburgh and London, which was 16 theatres in Edinburgh and 2 in London. And
have you the two of you ever actually worked on any productions together, or have you had any projects that you've helped each other with?
Well, Martin's helped me lots at various points. We've occasionally made connections for each other.
Yeah.
And Martin is indeed part of the faculty of teaching producers over here, as well as obviously teaching in many other forms as well. Just done a project yet.
If I could say one thing, and I think Chris knows I mean this in the best possible way, not about Chris, but about working in the UK, is what's always exciting about it is, first of all, I usually find that the audiences are coming to the theater because they actually intend to see that play, which is not the case in New York a lot of the time. But also because the pay scale is so low for everyone, for the crews in the theaters, for everybody you're working with, it's not that there's bitterness as there would be in America, but there's a collegiality we don't have either on or off Broadway in New York. You go to the pub when you're producing a West End show, working on a West End show, and every theater has a pub that's kind of the theater pub that people that work there go to. Everybody goes. The producers aren't in a corner with posh people. You're all there together. And I produced 5 West End shows. And I will just say that in all the nights I've been to a pub with my company and stage crew and everybody, I have never been able to pay for a drink. Where in New York, if I went to the bar with the crew from my Broadway show, they would never reach in their pockets ever, even though they're making $3,000 a week. It's just a much warmer, usually in general, I think a warmer environment to work in.
Ark has a question that I'm going to sort of rephrase it. Based on your experiences producing shows in London, and based on the experiences producing shows in the US, Martin, and also Chris chime in as well. Is there any advice, or are there any things that you think make something more appropriate or more likely to succeed in London? Is there any way of how do you know that your project actually might work in London? Now you talked earlier about the fact that we in New York are very reluctant to accept and embrace shows from outside of America that are about America. Does it work this? And you suggested it might be the same way in the UK. So subject matter isn't necessarily the thing that's going to make this happen.
I think I'll say really quickly a couple quick examples. It's about approach. It's totally about approach. I know when the American play Wit went to London, it was not a success. And I met with Darryl Roth, the producer, before she took it there, and we were talking about it. And I said, I don't think this is a good idea. He said, why? Now, I don't know if you know this play Wit, about a woman
I know
dying.
it very well. I know it painfully well. Yeah.
And the next to last scene, I think it's next to last scene, her doctor or somebody, a teacher, comes in and gives her a stuffed animal. And that made the English audience want to scream and throw rocks at the stage. Because if a woman's dying horribly of cancer in England, they want her to die horribly of cancer. And they don't want that sentimental escape valve that American audiences want. They want to leave smiling no matter what the play is. So whether it's, the play about child abuse, what's that play about the uncle abusing?
How I Learned to Drive.
How I Learned to Drive.
Yeah.
They let you off the hook. On the other hand, if you want to read the difference between I think about London audiences and American audiences, read the reviews in the New York Times or the Guardian the last couple of days of the production of Hello, Dolly in London with Imelda Staunton, which is a huge hit, as different from any production of Hello, Dolly that we would do in America as it could be, because they take it seriously. Dolly Levy is a serious character. It's a play about people and emotions and their lives. So that's the approach is just different to the work. Same thing happened to Legally Blonde in London. It was a disaster on Broadway because they just fluffed it around. And in England, they had a cast that maybe didn't sing quite as well, didn't quite dance as well, but they played the characters and they played the truth and the emotions. And I think that's a big difference that I always see in the work in the UK throughout the
It's interesting you say that, because it also seems to feed into the whole reality of the fact that plays in general fare much better in the UK than they do here on Broadway. I mean, we're kind of in an anomaly perhaps right now, because there are plays that are here that are succeeding, but in general, plays have always been much more welcome in London. We talked about this last week with Neil and Nancy and Michael and Paul as well. So you were going to say something, Chris. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely with what Martin's saying. Fundamentally, I think we are more interested in drama, and your audiences are more interested in song and dance. Now, there's a vast variation on that, but we absolutely go to the heart of the characters, and we have a tradition of plays and we have a tradition of drama. And so a piece that works in the UK will tend to have a deeper meaning, I think, and a deeper sense. Exactly as the example that Martin's given. I like RK Green's question, not all productions are suitable for London. What are the ways to test that? Remembering that that people think of London as the West End, but there's also a vast array of off-West End theatres, which attract different audiences and very deep and meaningful, considered audiences. And then there's the regional theatres across the UK, just as there are regional theatres across the US. So there are shows that could work out of the West End and potentially have a commercial life without necessarily being in the West End and playing to the tourist market. I guess, I don't know what the statistics are exactly, Martin, you probably know more accurately, but I always think that roughly a third of the West End audiences are theatre going people who regularly go to the theatre and part of the trade and things like that. About a third are regional tourists coming into London for their special trip once a year or twice a year or whatever. And about a third are international tourists and holidaymakers. But that core third at the beginning, which is the real core theatre goers, are really important to the success of a show. And the shows can work in the West End when they don't actually need the tourists at all. Yep. And it's trying to assess how those three audiences are going to relate to the particular show that you want to do.
I think the other big difference between the UK and the US is in touring. Because in the US, touring has become, this is how you get rich. Take your show on tour. If it's a good show, almost always a musical now, and you're playing 4,000 seat theaters with high ticket prices. And if your show costs you $500,000 a week to do on tour, the theater will guarantee you $700,000 a week. So they guarantee you're going to make a profit. In the UK, it doesn't work that way. In the UK, you share the box office. They frequently make you pay part of the marketing costs as if that's your problem. And Islander, this little show we did, cast of 2. So it travels with the stage manager, a sound A1, 2 actors and 2 understudies. It's a very small show, no band. It could not be smaller. And we, after we finished the US tour, we were supposed to do a UK tour for 8 months. And we worked with 2 different managements that do small scale touring. And they said, nobody can afford it. Nobody can afford to bring this show into the theater. It's right now, it's a disaster because none of the receiving venues for work other than big West End musicals really have much money to bring anything in, to even take the risk. And that's put kind of a damper on a lot of projects, not just mine, but that people I know in England have.
And just to reflect back, I saw Kirsty Finley, one of your stars from Islander, 2 nights ago in beautiful, the Carole King story, and she was absolutely stunning. Yes, we've had a political hideousness for the last 14 years. Excuse me being political for a second, but the money has been sucked out of the regions of the UK by a Tory government, and regional theatres are poorer. The grants coming into the funded theatres, the national portfolio organisations that were funded by the Arts Council have got less and less. But we have, a week ago, how long it was ago, got a change of government. And we've got a change of government with the Labour Party, where they believe in the arts and they believe in the power of the arts and they talk about it. I do hope and pray that that's going to have an effect on, in the long term, on theatre goers, theatre going, and the viability of the non-commercial theatre or the regional touring theatre, with any luck.
What we're not used to in America, but is the situation in the UK, where huge portions of people's budget came from the Arts Council of England. Is that what that's what it's called now?
Arts Council of England, yeah.
Rather than private corporations and donors. And they have always been very hands-on. If they don't like the work a theater is doing, I remember 25 years ago, they told the theater that if they didn't fire their artistic director, they were going to remove their grant because they didn't like what the theater was doing. The English National Opera, which was a hugely successful second opera company in London at the London Coliseum, doing opera only in English, great company. Suddenly the Tories decided that they wanted to give stuff to all of their constituents all over England. And so companies had to leave London. And they told the English National Opera, you know, we're taking away all of your money unless you leave London, where they've been forever, where all their staff lives, where their orchestra lives. And they're going to move for part of the year now. They're going to stay part of the year. But this is the power the Arts Council of England has always had, that they actually can demand you do things in exchange for the money.
We're
The
going
arm's
to go
length
to,
principle
I'm going
got
to go
very
to,
much shorter in the last few years. That arm's length principle that stood between government and the art. I think the arm's length will get back in place again with the Labour Party, I hope.
well, I'm not even going to talk about what's going on in our country.
Please don't.
Let's just run right over that one. Ross, be the voice of God. There are lots of questions, starting with Lisa Peretti, and going. There's a few more after that as well.
Okay, give me 1 second.
It's 6:10. She asked her question at 6:10. If that helps.
Ah, there you are. Oh, here. For an industry workshop production in London, what are your 2 key points for getting industry people in the room? To create the most interface around a new musical, Winghaven Park, September 2024, with a goal to develop the show in the UK.
Well, the question was the first thing. For an industry workshop
sorry,
production
first
in London, what are your 2 key points for getting industry people in the room? After that, basically, I think she's talking about her show.
I think, Chris, and you tell me if this is true, but certainly I think it's probably the same as in America, is producers get so many invites to workshops for shows. I mean, I get over 1,000 a year, plays and musicals, literally. That to make a decision, you look at who's in it, who's directing it, who's producing it. If there are quality people that you know involved, there's a chance it's a good show. If there's not, it's really dicey unless you have a contact in the industry there who will contact their colleagues to come. Because that's what we do. We look at, you know, we did an industry reading of this play that we're going to do in London, in New York, to raise money. And the cast we got for the reading in New York was Tyne Daly, John Glover, and one of the stars of the play Fat Ham, which was on Broadway at the same time. And those 3 names, and the director was Michael Lindsay Hogg, who directed some of the Beatles films and Agnes of God on Broadway. And those names got people into the room. The only person who's continuing with the project is the director. But without that cast, nobody would have, we wouldn't have gotten people. That's part of the trick, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the key thing for me is prepare the show so that it is really in good shape. So you're never showcasing something that actually should be in workshop or reading mode. Then, as you say, have some producers around who are attached to it, who are respected enough to be able to draw in other producers to see it. And most of the producers you can get without the showcase, but by having one-on-one conversations with them. And then do it twice and make sure there's wine, and choose the times carefully so that it's on twice, which makes it more difficult to say no. And in the UK, it needs to be within zone 2 of the underground so that it's almost walkable to.
Ross, next up.
Sorry, lost my place.
John Goldsberry says his director is doing a new work at London Palladium this fall,
Gotcha.
and that these are mostly 1 or 2 night affairs. She wants to take my show on the same path. Is this a common thing in the West End?
It's very new. It's very new and hasn't really happened. It didn't happen before COVID. It's a sort of post-COVID project where shows will get a sort of a couple of gala nights before anybody's really seen it, with the hope that it'll be so glitzy and fun that it will generate enough interest for a producer to produce it for a long run. And 1 or 2 producers, of the younger producers, have been trying that out with the Palladium, indeed, as a couple of nights in the Palladium or Drury Lane, and star-studded gala, sing through or semi-staged for the public and the trade, and then hope that people are going to come along and somebody's going to come along and give it a West End theatre. Whether that will work, I don't know. But it does raise the profile of a completely unknown show. There's a piece called Treason, which is about the gunpowder plot to blow up Parliament years and years ago, and that had a 2-night sort of gala.
So
and
let
it then
me
had
see
a UK tour.
let me see if I follow. Basically, you're saying that this is a relatively new model that started as a result, sort of as a response maybe to COVID, possibly. But you think it's a model that's going to be useful and it's going to be continuing?
I think it will continue. It's a sort of reverse encore. So you have Encore picking up shows that have been done and giving them another airing as a concert version with potential that they'll end up being full-scale productions on Broadway again. This is taking a show that nobody's ever heard of, usually, and giving it that kind of glitzy, encore-like semi-stage performance in the hope that people will get so excited by it that they will then produce it as a full-scale show.
So in other words, I think we're saying that it's a good thing. So,
well, the proof will be in a few years' time when one of those shows reaches the West End and stays.
So John, we're saying basically, John, we're saying give it a shot. It might work. Next up, Ross.
How do you think? Question for Chris. How do you think Operation Mincemeat will play to U.S. (parentheses Midwest) and Broadway audiences?
I hope it will play well. The reason I say that is because the audience coming in to see the show had no idea the history, really. The story is not known to the general public in the UK. The audience this evening there was a lot of Americans in the audience having a whale of a time. The American audience is aware of those kind of wartime movies, the stiff upper lip British and things like that, the precursor to James Bond, for example. And it's also great fun. It's got that 39 steps kind of craziness to it. So I believe it could work really well. And I think it should start in a small theatre and hopefully attract a good enough audience to keep it running for a good long time, which is what it's doing here in London. It's in the Fortune Theatre, which is a very small house.
Next up, Ross, Jesse's question.
Most grassroots theater companies have a majority of the funding come from individuals and large donors. Are regional companies in the UK getting the majority of their funding from the Arts Council?
It's a mixed model. Probably the Arts Council counts for, on average, 20 to 30% maybe of the income of a big regional house. I'm guessing these figures, but approximately. Probably 20 to 30% of the money is coming from donors, sponsors, fundraising, other generated income from inside the house that is not ticket sales. And the remaining 60-ish% is box office. So the Arts Council is an important player, as is local authority funding, city funding into theatres. So sometimes the Arts Council isn't as large as the city fathers and mothers putting money in, and that can support theatre as well.
Next up, Ross.
If I have a young American director who is also a professor of musical theatre at a prestigious college here, should I ask her to pitch my musicals to a UK theatre?
If the show feels as if it will work for a UK audience, then why not? That's a conversation to have with some UK contacts, colleagues, and really assess whether the subject works for a UK audience.
This is actually a great topic for a conversation to its own. But the whole idea of what works in London and what works in US It's a big conversation.
And it all
I
comes
can
down
share
to
two
the gut.
examples.
It
Yeah.
comes down to your gut, doesn't it?
I mean, two examples I can share is that you wouldn't probably guess one of these, but Spring Awakening, which ran 3 or 4 or 5 years on Broadway, ran 4.5 months in London. It was reviewed well, but it was a flop. The audiences, just word of mouth was not good. Nobody didn't go. Ghost, which was successful in the West End, came to Broadway and was almost laughed off the stage. And this is totally different expectations. And if you know these big European musicals, like Elizabeth, about the Empress, ran for 13 years in Vienna. I saw it there. And for those of us who are English and American, it was unspeakably horrible. I mean, just the music was horrible, the staging, it was just awful. But that audience loved it. It spoke to a totally different aesthetic, totally different way of doing things. It's not a bad show. Our shows aren't good shows. It's just a whole different understanding of Les Mis in France. No audience. They were insulted that the English took their work and made it into a hit, even though the authors were French. They just, no, we don't want to see this, and they didn't.
Yeah, it's not completely a mystery. Basically, you can make certain judgment calls based on the histories, based on evaluating things that have worked well in one country and not in the other. You can kind of come to some conclusions, but ultimately, I think it's what Chris was starting to say. It's a mystery. It's just you have to go with your gut. Although I don't want to say you have to go with your gut, because you have to go with your gut tempered by some research. You have to look into it. You have to think about what your show is and understand you gave a great insight. One of you, it was both of you maybe. Basically, that in London, the audiences want their characters to be taken seriously, and the United States were a little bit more open to having fun with stuff, and maybe it not being so serious. I don't know if that's 100% true all the time, but things like that. Somebody should really write a book about this. Why something works in one place and not the other. A rare example of a London show that came to New York and was almost as big a hit was Me and My Girl. I mean, of all things, who would expect that to have? I mean, who would expect that to appeal to a serious audience in London? And it was silly enough for the United States, and it was a big hit. It was an old show.
It was a throwback. It was like when we
Yeah.
did No No Nanette on Broadway. 60 years later, we were charmed by this distant musical from the distant past. That's a whole different class.
Did Drowsy Chaperone have a run in London? How did Drowsy Chaperone do?
Did about 3 or 4 months. It didn't work because they decided not to focus on the chair as the star and to put in some stars in the cast who weren't particularly big. Well, they weren't particularly popular names, and they should have made a total feature of Bob. And then I think it could have, for me, I think it could have worked.
That's Bob Martin, right? Bob Martin.
R.K. Green's put up a good point that many shows gain traction in Edinburgh. We do have this phenomenal festival every year in August. And if you look at shows like Six, for example, that came out of Edinburgh. And a number of shows will start very small in Edinburgh and develop an interest, some critical acclaim, some audience energy, and then potentially what happened with Six, grown a year later and taken back to Edinburgh into a bigger house with a bit more production values, and then tentatively taken into a small house in the West End, and slowly it grows. So Edinburgh is a really interesting testing ground for new shows. And if you are a new musical writer, there's probably 30 to 50 new musicals in Edinburgh this August, I would imagine, plus loads of classics as well. And there's musical theatre awards for new writing. But it is the largest festival in the world. There's about 3,000 performances a day in Edinburgh, at any one, 2,500 to 3,000 performances a day. So if anybody is interested in looking at that model of how to get a musical off the ground or a play off the ground, then come to Edinburgh and have a look at it. Look at the place first, get an understanding of it, and then begin to look at whether there's a market there. And all the West End producers go to Edinburgh at some point, all the programmers, all the festival managers from around the world. So it is a good place to be spotted.
I mean, 3 of the West End shows I did started in Edinburgh at the Fringe, and they won Fringe first, and they got attention, and we built that into West End shows.
Oh, I thought the play What Goes Wrong was absolutely serious. Totally.
I'm sorry. Ross, there are a few more questions.
There's one more. Is there a natural pipeline for shows that have this sort of tryout period, sort of like Paper Mill or Goodspeed?
We have we do have our very first new musicals house, or house dedicated to new musicals, for the very first time, with a real development pipeline going on, which is in Birmingham, our second city. The Birmingham Hippodrome has created a musicals hub, which could over time be a very young Goodspeed or a very young Paper Mill. There are other regional houses that specialize in developing musicals and putting musicals on. Sheffield and Plymouth are 2 big ones that have developed shows. Standing at the Sky's Edge came from Sheffield, which is playing in the West End at the moment. So we do have those houses that mount musicals and really give them a good airing, with the hope that they will, with some enhancement funding, end up in the West End.
Oh, I just want to say something to Martin about this. The pipeline of Paper Mill and Goodspeed is a different kind of pipeline. The pipeline we really have is more like Fifth Avenue Theater and Old Globe, and we have regional theaters that are kind of the pipeline to Broadway. Not often that Paper Mill or Goodspeed do a show that a producer is trying to move to commercial run. It's only happened a handful of times. Am I wrong?
Not very successfully ever. I mean, Great Gatsby is selling a lot of tickets.
Well, no. I mean, Goodspeed nurtured, I think, Annie and Shenandoah, and there were a couple of shows that came out of there that.
And they also.
But I don't think you intend. What?
Man of La Mancha. Man of La Mancha was a Goodspeed show.
Oh, Man of La Mancha, yeah. Not as frequently in the past like 10 or 20 years, but the breeding ground for new musicals, the incubators for new musicals really are regional theaters here, I think, more than.
Yeah, a lot of them.
I know Goodspeed and Paper Mill are regional theaters, but there's something different. I can't put my finger on it.
You know, I mean, the Atlantic has moved Spring Awakening.
They're moving something right now.
We have a show now. The Vineyard has moved shows to Broadway, like Avenue Q.
Buena Vista, what's it called?
Social Club is coming from Atlantic also. So, and all those shows, mind you, have, whether they admit it or not sometimes, they all have commercial producers attached before those theaters do them. They're not just found there. Oh, this is good, let's pick it up. There's a commercial producer who hides it at the Atlantic, and their name is nowhere on it. At least Barbara Broccoli, when she does new shows at New York Theater Workshop, has her name on it from the beginning. She's totally honest about the fact that, you know, she's done the show and she wants to move it.
We also in the UK, what we're finding more and more is that the bigger subsidised houses like the National Theatre and the Royal Shakespeare Company and the Royal Court, a house for new playwriting, are all, and the Young Vic, are all developing musical theatre as well. So there they're developing commercial projects, but with government funding underneath them, because they all want to find a big hit. The RSC needed a big hit in order to replace the reducing royalties from Les Miserables. And so they created Matilda. And all of those theatres want a big hit to feed money into their coffers as well. So that's another route. And the Royal Court, with David as the new artistic director, who helped to create Operation Mincemeat and ran New Diorama Theatre very successfully, is absolutely looking at developing musical theatre as one of those art forms within the new writing of the Royal Court.
Emma wants
difference is the Old Vic, which is not known for musicals, they did the first, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were the first UK theater that did Groundhog Day with the same lead, Andy Carl, fabulous guy. And in England, they loved that show. On Broadway, they hated that show. And again, same show, the same star, same creative team.
And
But-
in this case, it's counterintuitive because it's a show about American culture that
With
was
some-
embraced by London.
Some casting differences, because in America, Andy had no chemistry at all with the woman playing the woman, and that was different in London. So again, somebody saw the problem and they set out to fix it.
Okay. Emma wants to know, are you familiar with the Adelaide Fringe, Chris and Martin?
A very important fringe festival in Australia. It's much smaller than the Edinburgh one, but it is also a starting point more for, I mean, less for musical theatre that I've not heard of any musicals coming straight out of Adelaide, but very good for cabaret and smaller shows going in there. And quite a lot of shows that have been in Edinburgh will then go to Adelaide and go on to Sydney festivals and Melbourne as well. So yeah, Adelaide is probably the second most important international sort of cabaret and comedy festival, plus some musicals and theatre.
Last week, one of my takeaways from my Australian guests was that there is relatively little opportunity for development of new musicals in Australia. They really talked about that there just aren't theaters, and then there's not as much interest. I tried to convince them that they take a lesson from New York and develop things through concert versions of shows that, like we do at 54 Below. And they basically said, well, can somebody come down here and build a few cabaret spaces for us? So they're very venue poor. They don't have venues down there.
But also, I don't know if Neil talked about it in this session, but coming out of the pandemic, 4 big either UK or American, West End or Broadway musicals opened within a couple of weeks of each other in Australia. And it was a business disaster because, as Neil said, there aren't that many people in Australia to begin with, and there aren't enough people to support 4 huge, expensive musicals in 2,000-seat theaters at the same time. But these projects have been waiting, right, in the wings, and they all just went. And they realized that that audience is finite. To a degree they didn't think.
Yeah. So, do we miss anybody?
Melissa's question? Do you want us to take Melissa's question?
Sure.
Well, so in the UK,
Okay, so can you both speak a little more about the relationships between nonprofits and commercial producers in both UK and USA?
well, in the UK, we are blessed by having a range of theatres that have some core funding from Arts Council, local authorities, cities, things like that. So maybe their core staff are covered by subsidy, as it were. So it makes it less expensive to mount a show. Commercial producers are therefore talking with regional houses all the time about developing shows in those regional houses because it will be cheaper to mount. And those regional theatres have a duty to put on 6, 8, 10, whatever shows a year. And so with some enhancement money, those regional theatres will put on the show. It'll run for 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it might be. And hopefully it will cover its face in the regional house and everybody will be happy. The producer then has the right to take it further. And if it does manage to go further with investment coming in, then ultimately those regional houses will get a kickback in terms of a royalty coming back. So the oldest example being, or an old example, Les Miserables, RSC and Cameron Mackintosh. RSC mounted it, funded by the Arts Council effectively, came into the Barbican with Cameron's enhancement money. Cameron then brings it into the West End and takes it around the world. And the RSC gets a originating royalty as long as it's going.
We have a similar thing here, except we don't have any government subsidies. We don't have any support. So, Martin, how would you describe our model?
Well, for big musicals, it's really dysfunctional.
Okay, there's a good description.
So what happens
Dysfunctional.
is, if you have I was working on some projects, and if you have a Broadway scale musical, you want to try it out someplace. So you're going to try it out at the Old Globe, or at Center Theater Group in LA, or at Fifth Avenue in Seattle, maybe the Alliance in Atlanta, theaters that have a track record of working with producers on new musicals. And so I was working on a new musical that was going to cost, at the time before the pandemic, about $15 million on Broadway. And we could produce it at Seattle Rep and then go down to La Jolla Playhouse, 5 weeks in Seattle, 4 weeks in La Jolla, with 3 weeks in between to re-rehearse. That was going to cost around $6 million, of which we had to provide $4 million. And each theater provides $1 million, which is about what they would spend on a 6-character play. So they want your Broadway show. They want their board members to be able to go and see it open on Broadway, but they kind of want you to pay most of the cost. And they don't necessarily let you take the scenery and costumes with you for that money. That becomes a second negotiation. Whereas all the times I've worked with Plymouth, for instance, which has great scene shops and costume shops and stuff, the deal you make with them, as Chris was saying, your core staff is paid for from government funding. So we did this huge motorized musical there, motorized scenery, cast of 26, and we paid no labor costs to build the scenery, costumes, props, anything, because those were their staff who were funded anyway, no matter what was going on there. So in America, the labor cost to make your show is astronomical. And when you start out of town in a theater, that's the theater's part of it. And you feel much less like you're paying for everything and getting nothing, except an initial run of your show. Financially, it's a better deal in the UK than it is here.
So basically, we don't have any easy answers about any of this. But to go back to the main topic of the discussion today, partnerships are valuable, and one thing that I think is the biggest takeaway from a lot of this conversation for me is just understanding that you have to partner with somebody. If you're going to produce outside of your country or outside of your culture, have somebody that you can partner with who understands the culture that you're going into. So I think that's one of the big things. The other thing that everybody should be aware of is Chris is developing this new database so that producers can find each other. We also do what we do here so people can find each other, and Chris does networking events as well to try to get producers to meet each other and find ways to work each other. That's actually was the original mission of TRU, like 32 years ago, to get people in a room together to meet each other and find out ways to work together and help each other. So in a sense, this really is a very true topic of conversation. Partnerships are an essential part of life, and not just business. And really, partners are really key to situations in which you may be lacking something that somebody else is able to provide, and that's why you find ways to work together or live together or whatever. So just, you guys, I want you to know that if you're able to stay a little, I know people would love to meet you. Are you able to stay a little longer? Because I'm gonna say my farewells to YouTube in a moment. Okay, I'm gonna go in and thank. First of all, I want to thank Martin Platt, and I want to thank Chris Grady for being here with us today, and for another stimulating conversation. Also was a nice tag to last week because last Friday we talked about basically Australian theater and the differences between American, UK, and Australian theater. So this really is continuing a conversation in a very positive and useful way. So thank you, guys. And I want to thank everybody out there in our audience right now, in our community, for being part of the community. I still stuns me that so many people show up every week. Thank you, after 215 or 16 weeks. And for those of you out there who are just discovering us, again, this is Theater Resources Unlimited on Bob Ost. We're an organization that's dedicated to helping people understand and navigate the business of theater. And if you're in theater or you're thinking about being in theater, come be part of us. Come to the community. Come join us. All you have to do is email me at trunltd@aol.com. It's trunltd@aol.com. And we'll invite you every week. Next week, I have a panel about marketing for theater. We have a company called Biz Chica Media, who specialize in multicultural marketing, which is an essential niche that a lot of us are not very good at. So come hear some interesting conversations about that. And in 2 weeks, come meet Blair Russell and Jane Dubin, who teach our producer development and mentorship program. If you've toyed with the idea of being a producer, or if you really know you want to be a producer, or you just want to know more about the business and understand theater better, come meet Jane and Blair and learn about our program and maybe apply to our program. What else can I tell you other than I'm glad that you're with us. I'm glad you found us, and I hope you'll come back. Thank you.